Hello, everyone. This is Kerwin, and welcome to another episode of What's Happening in Travel with Kusher and Kerwin. I'm Kerwin. Kusher is not here today. And so my background today is a JetBlue A321LR. It was taken at actually the Paris Air Show earlier this year in June. And I had the JetBlue airplane because it is a subject of one of today's topics, and we'll get right into it. So JetBlue have been expanding across the Atlantic, and they fly these A321s from New York to they do London Gatwick, London Heathrow, Paris, and now Amsterdam. And the Dutch government has said that they're going to reduce the number of slots or departures and landings in 2024 because of environmental issues as well as noise abatement. Typically, if you live around the airports, there's always so much noise, and it's just one of the factors of living by an airport. And so Schiphol said, "Well, we're going to reduce it." All the airlines are complaining that if you reduce it, all the financial implications and everything like that. And so JetBlue is like, "Well, yeah, we don't want you to do it." They currently have 2 flights a day to Amsterdam from New York. And one of the things I always think that airlines, they're very egotistical. It's just how they are. Everybody wants to be the biggest. Everybody wants to be the coolest and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think JetBlue needs to fly internationally. They obviously do. They have all the numbers. I don't. But they're in the marketplace. People like them and people are using them. What happens in my mind when airlines expand too much, and you see this all the time, they start small, they have a big roadmap that they want to fill, but then they start to do it too quickly. And when they start to do it quickly, they don't have enough airplanes, they don't have enough staff, they don't have a big enough network. And when something happens, they don't compensate you properly. And it's all good and well to have this great network, but when a network doesn't work, that's what dictates how the airline works. I say this because recently, as recently as this week, I was flying from Orlando to Charlotte to Houston in America. I took the Bright Line training from Fort Lauderdale to Orlando. And so I get to the airport and the flight's delayed. And initially I was gonna have a very close connection in Charlotte. But then the delay got more so that I would miss the connection in Charlotte. And so I called up American and I said, "Hey, actually when you get in the app, American is actually quite good about this. When you get in the app, they show you how you can rebook. And it basically says you can rebook as much as you want. And there's no cost to rebooking. Perfect, right? And so I said, okay. But some of the options they were giving me, I didn't like the options because I would get in like after midnight. I didn't want to get in after midnight. So then I called and the guy was really very good. And he said, "Look, I can get you home tomorrow." And I go, "Okay, fine. What time?" 5 a.m. I go, "No, I'm not getting up at 5 a.m. Eventually, we settled on like 11 something. Once, and I said, "Well, where am I going to sleep tonight?" He goes, "Well, you can go ahead and book a hotel and we will reimburse you." I said, "Well, how do I do that?" He said, "You go online and you look it up. And I think you look for like a travel compensation or something like that. Whatever form online, you fill it out." And I was like, "You know what? I'm not going through any forms. I'm at the airport. Let me just go see if I can get a voucher." Because he's already approved me to fly the next day. And I think it was because of a mechanical. So I get to the agent and she had this little chip on her shoulder. And I say that because I was trying to explain to her what happened and she like cut me short. "Let me see your reservation." I'm like, "Maybe if you let me speak first." But she was standing between me and the hotel room, and I wasn't going to argue with her. So what she did, she pulled my reservation up, and then she goes, well, if you qualify, we'll get you a hotel. And I was like, what do you mean if I qualify? I'm flying on you. You have a delay. I'm going to miss my connection. Of course I qualify. But apparently in airline speak, you only qualify if it's not something that's out of the airline control. So basically she was saying if it was ATC, I wouldn't have qualified for a room. Or if it was weather, I wouldn't have qualified for a room. But it was their fault. It was their faulty airplane that's causing the problem. So yay, I was qualified. So then she goes, well, where do you live? I said, I'm in Texas. And I'm thinking, well, what does that have to do with anything? Apparently, based on the conversation that the two of them had while I was standing in front, if you're originating in that city and you live in that city, they don't give you compensation. Now, I think that's weird, right? Because if, and I understand why they're doing it to save money, but let's say I'm going on vacation. I've locked up the house. I've done everything. I might have even driven 2 hours to get to the airport. So now you want me to go back to my house, which is 2 hours away, reopen up the house and then come back tomorrow morning? No, that doesn't make any sense at all. But apparently that's what she was saying. So once I showed her everything, she was fine. I got my hotel room and then I was good. Then the next day, the flights were delayed again. And so I did a routing. I was in Orlando. So I was supposed to have done Orlando to DFW to Houston. Well, the flight they were going to misconnect and they were going to be super late. And so I decided, okay, well, since I was at the airport really early, let me go Orlando to Miami and then Miami to Houston. Well, that didn't work. I got to Miami, but the flight to Houston, I had a later flight, but the earlier flight I couldn't get on. And then I said, well, let me just take an earlier flight and do Miami, Dallas, Dallas to Houston. Well, the Miami, Dallas was delayed. It was just a day of delays. Then when I finally got to Dallas, the Dallas Houston flight was delayed. So every flight I had was delayed. But American has a really big network, right? And despite that really big network, I was still inconvenienced over a day. So the point I'm making is, I've had people fly JetBlue, and they were flying to the Caribbean, and when the flight was delayed like, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours, and they couldn't find a replacement airplane, or whatever they were doing, they didn't have another way to get the people home. And I've been in Jamaica where I see like a JetBlue airplane sitting there. So the point I'm making is, you're expending your network too much. You are not taking care of the customers that are already within your network. All you want to do is say, hey, I fly to all these places and it's cool, but you got to take care of your customers, right? And in order for you to take care of customers, if your network is that big, that's fine, but you need to take care of your customers. When you have customers waiting hours on end in the airport and your planes are running late, you are not taking care of your customers, and it's not time for you to add more flights at all. I don't care what you tell me, it is not, because you're not taking care of your customers. And so in this case, they're bitching at Amsterdam, Schiphol, the government of the Netherlands, that, hey, they currently have 2 flights a day. So I assume they want to add more flights. And so they're complaining that, well, if you're going to reduce flights, then we can't add more flights, or may even have to reduce some of the flights that we currently have. So maybe they go to 1 flight instead of 2. And then it gets even worse. They're telling the US government that because the Netherlands government is cutting down the number of flights into there, then the US government should deny KLM some flight rights to come into the US. Seriously, come on, JetBlue. I understand what you're trying to do, but I don't like what you're trying to do. Of course, it's just me speaking, right? Now, this is the same airline that I read or been told that French B used to be called French Blue, and French B had to change their name from French Blue to French B, because said airline, JetBlue, was going to be flying into Paris, and they didn't want to have the confusion. So some of these airlines are very interesting. But what do you think? I mean, do you think that if the government is reducing the flights into the country for whatever reason, do you think that one airline really has the right to tell their government that they should do the same thing? They should have a tit for tat. When, I mean, like I said, the airline is not delivering proper service to all those customers. So yes, it looks good for you to be flying to Amsterdam, Paris, and London, but are you serving your customers well? And at the end of the day, that's what counts. So anyway, next topic. Something came over the wire that there was a pilot who was jump seating. Let me just explain what jump seat is. In the airline industry, as a pilot or a flight attendant, you can fly on your own airline, or you can find another airline, as long as your airlines have an agreement. The jump seat is a seat that sits in the cockpit. Depending on which airline it is, it could be 1, 2, 3 seats in the cockpit itself, which is usually reserved for pilots and airline officials. And sometimes, depending on what country you're in, the pilot's going to allow passengers to sit up there. It doesn't happen in the US, but it happens in other countries. I've sat in the jump seat a few times, actually in a few countries. Actually here in the US, long time ago, before everybody got all crazy. But I've done jump seat land. It's one of the coolest things you ever do as an aviation geek. But and the other jump seat is the one that's inside the airplane, outside the cockpit, and it's the one you see the flight attendant sitting on. So this gentleman was an approved and authorized person from Alaska Airlines that was flying on Horizon Air, which is the one that does their it's an Alaska airline flight, but it's operated by Horizon Air. It was from Painfield, and Painfield is the other airport. There's an Embraer 175, and it flies between Painfield and San Francisco. Now, I've actually flown that route. I flew San Francisco to Painfield and back on United. They had like a cheap, it's like $100 for the fare a few years ago. And so I bought a ticket and flew Houston, San Francisco, Painfield. Then I went and walked around Painfield for a little bit, because Painfield is where the airport where all the airplanes, not all the but the wide-body airplanes of Boeing are made. Well, not all of them, because 787s I think they're made down in the Carolinas, I think. But the 747, 767s used to be made up there when those production lines were on. So it was cool to land in Painfield. So they were flying Painfield to San Francisco. The pilot, during the flight, he tried to, I guess, activate the engine fire suppression unit, which would actually shut down the engines. Pilots realized what he was doing. They both struggled with him, and then he stopped. And then they took him out of the cockpit, of course, and restrained him in the back. And when they landed, police came on and arrested him. So a few days later, like 2 days later, he says, well, when he was in court, he says he had taken a mushroom like 48 hours before the flight. And I guess the effects of the mushroom are still there. Although I read somewhere where some doctors say that if you've taken mushroom 2 days before, it wears off. It doesn't stay in your system that long. And apparently he's depressed and things like that. So that's the other news that's out there. Luckily, he's been charged with, I think, 83 counts of manslaughter because there are 83 people on board. And luckily they landed safely, and the pilots were able to take care of her. But jump seating is something that's done throughout the industry, because all the pilots are authorized to be in the cockpit. And this was not like another airline pilot This was a pilot from Alaska Airlines. Now, Alaska Airlines, they have the they call it the main line, which is the big airplanes, and then they have the Alaska Horizon Air, which is the express jet, if you want to call it that. That's a wrong name, but it's a smaller airplane, Embraer 175s that they fly now on these shorter routes. Painfield can, of course, take a long runway, but it's a short route between Painfield and, because it's in Everett, Washington, going down to San Francisco, it's a short route. So they use the 175 for it. And I was just looking at the schedule and it looks like United doesn't fly that route anymore, but they did at one point. So that's that second story. And luckily nothing happened. And I do have a third story. Just pull that one up. We talked about JetBlue. We talked about JetBlue. And did have another story. Yeah, I guess that's probably it. Yeah. So those are the two major stories that, of course, a lot else has been going on in the aviation industry, but they're out of the scope of this newsletter, of this podcast, so we will not get into those. I'm just checking quickly to see if there was anything else that I have. Nope. The other thing, in Houston this week, there were two private airplanes, and one of them took off, didn't get permission to take off, and he clipped the other one. This happened at Houston Hobby. I don't think there were damages to the airplane, but I don't think there was any damage to anyone else. But the airport was closed for a little bit. So it's been an interesting week in aviation. I did get a chance to go to the NBAA, which is National Business Aviation Association, I think is what they are the A's for. I might be incorrect. But this is a show that's held every year. It's held usually in Orlando. It was held in Las Vegas this time. But it was actually held, I think they had another show in Las Vegas another time too. And it's where all the business aviation people come together, and they have all the different airplanes and things like that. And the Volocopter was there. Volocopter, if you're not familiar, eventually be an autonomous airplane. But I think for the moment, they're testing it. So it's been tested with one pilot. It'll be able to take one pilot and one person in it, and they're going to be using it to do commuting in Paris during the Olympics next year in 2024. So they had it testing out there, and I'd seen it being tested in Paris also earlier this year during the Paris Air Show. So they had that, and there's a lot of new airplanes, new business jets that are coming out. Cessna has this, I think it's the citation next gen CJ3, CJ2 airplanes coming out. There's some Beechcraft King Air, which is also out there. They delivered like the 100th one of that. If you've never flown a King Air, they're really nice planes. And so I have a link that I'm going to post with some a wrap up. The other cool thing that was out there too was they had the guys who flew the Top Gun. They were there, and it was amazing just chit-chatting with them and seeing some of the stuff that they did and kind of hearing, so a little behind the scenes. So they basically had 3 airplanes. There's like looks like a fighter jet, but it's not really a fighter jet. Well, it's a fighter jet. And they had another business jet, and they had a helicopter. And so those 3 airplanes are what they used to do the filming. They were mentioning that it was a Navy pilots that were doing a lot of that flying that you see. And somewhere up in Washington State is where they had the scenes that they did, because that's where they normally practice anyway. And so it was very, very cool to see that. And they're talking about where the cameras are placed and things like that. So that was good to see. And so that's all I have. But next month I'm going to be heading to the Dubai Air Show. So hopefully I'll have some good insights from that. But if you get any questions, send a note to feedback at passrider.com, and make sure you subscribe and set your notifications on. So whenever I load a new episode, you'll hear about it. I haven't loaded a new episode in a little while, so sorry about that. But I'm going to try to get back on the podcast wheel and get those sent out. So this is Kerwin with passrider.com, cruisenaut2.com for another episode of What's Happening in Travel with Kushal and Kerwin. Talk to you soon.